everyone's Monday is going well. All right, just waiting for technology to come on up. All right, welcome everyone. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Ponzurek. For those of you who don't know me, my background is as a school psychologist. I've been working in the field of school psychology for over 20 years. And lately I have been spending my time doing a lot of support in school districts for school psychologists. I get to do a lot of trainings around topics like learning disabilities and dyslexia, which was something I wanted to chat about today, as well as report writing and lots of other fun topics. I also get to help out and support in a couple of my nearby school districts with some overflow assessments. So while I'm not fully employed by any school district, I do get to still go to AAP meetings and write reports and procrastinate writing reports and all those other things. So not quite sure how many more days you guys have left. The main school district I'm with still has over 2 weeks left. So still have a couple more meetings to finish up before the end of the year here. So what I wanted to chat with you guys today about was around this topic of dyslexia and how can we help figure out if this is dyslexia or a lack of appropriate instruction, especially in this time that we're in right now. And just to kind of start things off, I mentioned that I've been in this field for over 20 years. The word dyslexia really in the school system, and I'm just going to talk for me, has really changed a lot over the years. I remember very early on when parents would come in and ask about dyslexia or teacher happened to drop the term, we used to say things like, we don't talk about that here. We don't look at dyslexia here. Like, that's a medical condition. You should go talk to your doctor. It wasn't anything that we were really focusing our attention on a lot, that term. That has definitely changed over the last couple of decades. Now when I have other people, making diagnoses like a doctor on a prescription pad, I think the child has dyslexia and needs an IEP, then I'm like offended. I'm like, why are you talking about that? That's my realm, right? So things definitely change in our wonderful world of school psychology and working within this amazing field of special education in our public school system. So one of the things that I get to do is I get to help support, like I mentioned, a lot of school psychologists. I have a couple of membership groups, and I regularly get to have some conversations with school psychologists. And this was a topic we've been talking about a lot this year, especially for those of you who are working with those younger elementary school students. I think like every time I'm in a consultation call and someone's like, they're a first grader or they're a second grader, we're just like, oh. And just because whatever last year looked like for your student, like it's always a question in the back of our head nowadays on whether or not we're actually talking about like an actual learning disability, or are we talking about a lack of appropriate instruction? Does the student require special education, or does the kid need an intervention program or some actual direct instruction? Those are a lot of the questions that we really are grappling with. And we have a lot of people who are using different terms like dyslexia. I practice in the state of California. In California, our Department of Education came out with a document back in 2017, the California Dyslexia Guidelines, and actually provides like a definition that we're able to reference. They adopted the use of the definition from the International Dyslexia Association, which I think a lot of different states have adopted that definition. And so I think one thing that's always important is whatever state that you are practicing in, that you have a good idea about how are we defining the word dyslexia? How are we responding to that term dyslexia? Because if you look at the definition of dyslexia through the International Dyslexia Association, it really pinpoints a lot of different areas when I think about which areas we should be focusing on for evaluation and how might we talk about this in our report if we think that's important to talk about and reflect on this word dyslexia. It talks about some real key pieces. It talks about the academic areas that we're usually referencing in dyslexia, accurate and fluent word recognition, spelling, and decoding. It talks a lot about different aspects that can really help support a student in reading success. They talk a lot about the phonological component of language. So of course, phonemic awareness and, different tests that are able to take a look at that, really important. But one of the other key pieces of that definition is that these difficulties are unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Now, in most years, when we're not in the middle of a global pandemic, most years when I talk about effective classroom instruction, a lot of schools that I'm working at, I'm like, all of our teachers are using, state adopted reading programs and curriculum. Fingers crossed, my school has some evidence-based intervention programs that, supposedly work for kids with reading difficulties. It's really been the last couple of years that we've really question this appropriate instruction a lot more than we have in the past. And again, really being reflective on what did the 2020-21 school year look like for your student? And for a lot of our students, what did our current school year, 21-22 school year look like? Now, for a lot of our schools nowadays, students have much more consistent attendance. Teachers are showing up every day, but we definitely had a long period of time. I don't know what was going on in your schools. We had a period of time even during this school year where we didn't have teachers showing up because everyone was being quarantined and so many people were getting sick and students were missing 14 days at a time or 10 days at a time. And then they would come back and there were substitute teachers. And we really have a question about whether or not we want to call something an actual learning disability, or is this about instruction, right? So one of the things that I think is always important when we're doing our evaluations for students and we're making that determination as a team about whether or not the student has a disability and requires special education, we always do a thorough educational history. One of the things that I have found to be even more important in the last 2 years is really getting some context. So I know how to interpret some of my information. So I want to know how to interpret my phonemic awareness information. I want to know what kind of context to help me interpret these standardized achievement tests or curriculum-based measures. Because most of these things, when they were created, of course, there was nothing called COVID in the midst of all of that. And so I need some context in which to help me as the school psychologist, who typically I would see most of us are kind of leading a lot of these discussions at these meetings, really are able for ourselves and to give everyone else that context for that interpretation. So for me, one of the things I've been asking a lot of my families is to help me get that context. What did it look like last year? I can look up quarantine information for this year, attendance information. For some of our school districts, attendance information for the 2021 school year was an interesting way that we were taking attendance. Kids sometimes showed up for this Zoom session, but not that Zoom session. And what did that look like? So really trying to gather some information from the families. One of the things that I've talked to some of the school districts that I work with about is, most of us have our health and development questionnaire, whatever we call that document. It's usually multiple pages. We have the parents fill it out for every initial evaluation, and we have a shortened version for all of our reevaluations. And we've just been adding questions to the back, or that'll help us with some of that context. Questions like, what was it like last year for your family? How consistent was your student able to show up to those online, learning situations? When your student had questions, who could they go to? A lot of these different aspects were things that we were just adding to the back of our questionnaire just as an additional page, and we're adding it for our reevaluations as well. Now, for my little kids, sometimes it's a little bit harder to get some, direct input from them. But definitely when I'm working with my middle school and my high school students, I've added that to my student interview as well. What did last year look like for you? What did you think about distance learning? Because I have worked with some students. I remember I worked with one student this year, and she was very upfront and said, I did not like it. I stopped showing up. I could not handle it. Okay. So you kind of didn't get a mass amount of instruction during last year. And then I talked to another high school student, and she was like, I loved it. I wish we were all doing it. She was like, I loved it. It was these short little things, and then I could go take like my own break, and I didn't have to worry about all the social parts of school. And okay, that's great. Like, that gives me a different context on how to interpret some of this information. So I think trying to figure out and gather a lot of this extra information, and since most of our kids were hanging out with their families last year for long periods of time, definitely one of the sources of information. And I know for me, when I write up the educational history section of my reports, I have like a love-hate relationship with that section of the report, because for me, it's where I start seeing trends and patterns. It's where I'm documenting information that people can point to when we get to, all of our conclusions as a team. But it takes forever to write. It just takes forever. I'll be very upfront. It's usually one of the things that I procrastinate the most about. Once I get into it, it's pretty okay. It's definitely easier to write for a second grader than it is for an 11th grader. A lot quicker for second graders, right? A lot less information typically that I have to include there. So one of the things I think to keep in mind is, how are we going to get that extra information so we have that context? And then the other thing would be, when we're looking at the areas that our students may be struggling in, if we are participating in that evaluation, is around, which processing areas are we most concerned about? I know some states have, different kind of amount of focus on different processing areas. Like I mentioned before, I practice in California. We're very focused on processing areas. It's part of our definition. So it's something that we have to identify when we're looking at learning disabilities. And when we think about the maturation and the development and the trajectory of a lot of the different ways that our brains process and remember and learn information, a lot of those things just continue to grow, right? When I think about my receptive and my expressive language skills, those continue to grow. Again, schools can be really helpful for a lot of those pieces, but just being around in the world and being around other people, a lot of those skills are going to continue to grow. But we definitely have some skills that require explicit instruction. And a lot of those skills are related to reading success. Right? When we think about a lot of our phonemic awareness skills, I think about my students' needs to be able to blend sounds together and segment sounds apart, especially in our English language. We think about all of those different aspects. It's not like we just wake up one day and all of a sudden we've got some skills, right? Like all of a sudden I can blend. Nope, we actually need to have some explicit instruction in those areas for us to be able to learn those skills. And so again, going back to that context and writing down, including all that information, typically in our educational history, it might go in some of our updated academic information, but really laying that foundation of, this is why the team is coming to this conclusion at the end, and this is why we may be saying that not showing up to school consistently or distance learning situations may be an exclusionary factor for some of our students. Not all of them, right? Some of our students came to school consistently. Some of our schools were able to provide some really interesting ways to do evidence-based reading interventions for our kids that were struggling last year. There were a lot of different things that worked really well. But for some of our students where we're able to document, they, for whatever all these listed reasons, were not showing up to instruction consistently, that could be a reason why I'm getting low scores on the CTOP. It could be a reason why we're still struggling with decoding skills, which would then impact fluency and comprehension skills, right? So one of the things to always be thinking about is, what am I noticing about this specific student? right? Why am I finding that this specific student is struggling with reading? Exclusionary factors have always been a part of our discussion, especially for learning disabilities, but even more important in our current surroundings, right? Okay. So I've definitely talked a little bit about phonological processing. Phonemic awareness would fall underneath that. Our phonological memory skills, our rapid naming skills, kind of all of those pieces together would fall under that term, phonological processing. And we also know, especially for the English language, the importance of orthographic processing as well. And, hand in hand, right? Being able to sound out words and then remember, oh, I don't need to sound out C-A-T anymore. That's cat. I visually recognize and remember that sequence of letters. I don't have to memorize that, right? And again, our English language, in comparison to some other languages that are much more regular sound symbol correspondence, English is definitely not one of those. English language is considered to have deep or opaque orthography because of the complexity of our sound symbol correspondence and the fact that sometimes phonemic awareness does not get you to every single word in our English language. And we have all of these words. We call them irregular words. We call them high frequency words. We call them sight words. The words our kids just have to remember, right? So what I did is I was putting together some different videos and guidance. And one of the conversations I have a lot about with psychologists is dyslexia, and understanding these two foundational pieces and how they work together so that our kids can be successful in reading. Something I worked on a little bit ago, and I decided to give access to both of these videos to anyone who's interested. So if you head over to my website, and I'm sorry if you can't see it very big, it says jennyponzurek.com. If you go to /live, L-I-V-E, for all of the Facebook and Instagram lives, you're going to see a place where if you're interested in getting access to both of these videos, all you have to do is give me your name and email address, and then you'll get an email with access to both of these videos. And if you take a look on that page, jennyponzurek.com/live, then you will also see a couple other freebies that I'm providing right now. So if any of those are of interest to you, you can sign up for whichever ones sound intriguing for you. But if this is an area that you yourself always want to make sure that you understand these different terms. I know a lot of times in our university programs, we talk a lot about the phonological processing. Depending on when you went to school, I will tell you 20 plus years ago, I don't think we ever said the term orthographic anything. And it's interesting talking to a lot of newer school psychs coming out of university programs. Some of them are talking a lot about these terms, and some of them haven't heard about them either. So if you just want to kind of hear through some information again, feel free to go to my website, jennyponzurek.com/live, and you can go ahead and get access to both of these videos. Just give me your name and email address. And if for some reason you don't get that email right away, give it a couple of quick minutes. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes, and then just double check that it didn't go to your spam folder. All right. The last thing I want to just talk about in regards to dyslexia, those two videos anyone can access right now. I am going to do a deeper dive into the conversation of dyslexia this summer. For those of you who don't know, I offer some online opportunities for a lot of school psychologists. And one of the things that I'm offering this summer is, I call it Summer Boot Camp. It's my third year doing it. The first year, I think we had 9 weeks, and then last year we did it in 4 weeks, and this year we're doing it in 2 weeks. We have different sessions for people that are, brand new to the field. We have some sessions that are really focused on people that are newer to the field, and then we have some deep dive sessions as well. And one of them that we are offering is about dyslexia, and I'm going to do a deep dive into it. I'm the one who gets to talk about this topic. And we are going to be talking about this over 2 days. So the deep dive topics each have 2-hour time frames. So I decided to do it over 2 days. So it'll be a 4-hour kind of focus in on this conversation. And one of the things that I wanted to be able to do in these deep dives is really get into this conversation and really be able to bring up some case study examples about when do I call this, or characteristics of dyslexia? How do we talk about this term, especially if it's a little uncomfortable for you to use some of this terminology, because some of us in some of our states, we're really still, of course, just focusing on all of our eligibility classifications, and we're not quite sure how to talk about some of the other terms like dyslexia. And then, oh my goodness, what do we do with dyscalculia and dysgraphia, right? So dyslexia tends to be a word that's being used in a lot of states. We have a lot of states that have their own dyslexia guidelines. I mentioned before, I practice in California. If you haven't taken a look, we have some California dyslexia guidelines. You literally could Google that. You can find some great information. I know I was in a training the other day about dyslexia, and they were also talking about Arizona also has a really great document as well. And if you're in a state and your state has a really great dyslexia document, you want to share that with others, feel free to drop that in the comments so that other people know about that one as well. But if you're in a state that doesn't have any, check out California and Arizona. Both have some dyslexia guidelines for you guys to take a look at. If you are interested in taking a look at the summer boot camp, all the information is at my website, jennypunzart.com. If you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see some information about summer boot camp. We have free sessions for all of our brand new hires and those of you who are still students. And then the next level, we have what I refer to as improving my practices for those newer school psychologists. And we have 10 sessions over 10 different days. Those are going to be 90 minutes each. And those sessions are available for just one cost for all of them, and that's $37. And then these deep dives can be purchased. We have 4 different deep dive topics. Dyslexia is one of them. And you can purchase them separately, or you can purchase all of them together. And if you're interested in hanging out with me this summer and talking a little bit about dyslexia, we can kind of take that deep dive into that. And if you're interested in this, but you're like, oh my goodness, I'm actually taking a summer break, we're going on vacation, all of the sessions are going to be recorded and all of the replays are going to be available for anyone who signs up. The recordings will be available through the end of October. So if you're taking the summer off, good for you. You can still have access to it, but you will need to sign up before summer boot camp starts to get all of this great stuff. All right, guys, I'm just going to check to see if we have any questions coming up here. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat or anything. Let me just check one other place. All right, guys. If you guys have any questions, feel free. If you just go to my website and scroll down a little bit, you'll always see a place on every page to ask me a question. So if there are any questions that you have after listening to this about our summer boot camp, feel free to reach out. And for some of you guys, I hope you decide to join us in summer boot camp. And for those of you who are doing other things, I hope you're enjoying those last couple of days for some of you, weeks for some of you of this school year. And I will hope to talk to all of you soon. Thank you, guys.